Hello everyone, we're back again. And last week we went into the subject of adapting vintage lenses to your mirrorless DSLR. When I did that video, I came to a realization, which was that the adapter, which is a speed booster I was using in that video and that I've been using for quite a while, it seems like that adapter might not be the best. And that adapter is a Zhonggi Turbo 2. What's special with this one is that it has some glass inside. So what this lens does is that it's kind of removing the crop factor that you get on an APS-C sensor-sized camera. And I particularly like to use this kind of adapter, especially when I'm shooting with vintage lenses. Because many of the older vintage lenses, well, first of all, my favorite is 50mm, and many of the 50mm has a certain character and they have a certain field of view that I enjoy a lot. So it's quite natural for me that I want to have that field of view when I put it on my Fujifilm camera. One might say, well, just get a full frame camera and problem is solved. Well, yes and no. It's not a Fujifilm camera. Fujifilm doesn't have full frame sensor size cameras, and that's an issue because I am a big fan of the Fujifilm X Pro 3 and the way it looks. Of course, I could get a Leica. Yeah, right. Who do you try to kidding? You can't afford a Leica. But, well, first of all, Leica is very expensive and it doesn't really have autofocus as those cameras have. So it's cheaper, more versatile, better. Okay, I'm not going to go down that route of discussions. But anyway, because of that smaller sensor, adapters which are called focal reducers or speed boosters are a very good option. So when I did that episode with the adapters, I realized, as I mentioned, that this adapter is not the greatest. So I wanted to come back into this subject and test the adapters a little bit more. And also because of that, I decided to pick up a new adapter, in this case a Viltrox Adaptor. And this adapter has some electronics inside of it. As you see here on this lens or the adapter, there's some electronic contacts here. Same goes on the other side. And that means it's possible for me to control autofocus and also using lenses where the camera is adjusting the aperture. This one also works very well with vintage lenses that doesn't have any electronic contacts. I know from experience, especially from a Metabones adapter that I tried before, that sometimes if you put on an adapter like this without the contacts, you're gonna get error messages. But this one works with vintage lenses. So the test I've decided to do today was, first of all, I wanted to try this Viltrox adapter and see if it is good. So what I started to do is that I took out a Canon FD Mark IV with a 50mm EF lens 1.4. I use this lens a lot, I know how it performs, and I know that it's sharp, so it's a good lens. So I did one test with this lens on this camera, and then I took the Viltrox adapter and I put it on this camera. And then I compared them both to see like how sharp are they, where do they fall apart. Well, it's not the same sensor in these cameras, but it kinds of give you an idea how this adapter performs nevertheless. I was not really ready to give up the hope on this adapter, because last time when I did this test, I used a Canon FD 1.4. And I know that some of those older 1.4 lenses, you kind of compromising sharpness and clarity to get that light sensitivity. So today I have a Canon FD 50mm 1.8 instead, and I hooked that up on the Chinese Zhonggi adapter, just to see if, to do my test again and to see if there was a human error or if it perhaps was the lens error. And I also decided to bring out this one. This is a Samyang 50mm lens with a T-stop on 1.5. I use this lens a bit, mostly for filmmaking. And what I would know about this one is that the focus peaking this one generates are good, so it's easy to focus on it. And the reason why I wanted that was that it's gonna help me to put the focus on the exact right spot. Most of these tests are done on an aperture on 2.8, so let's bring out the computer and let's have a look on what we got. First of all, what we could see is that the field of view is not exactly the same. This is the Canon picture, and this compares to the Viltrox adapter. What we could see here is that it's slightly more narrow with the adapter. But let's check out sharpness. And by the first look on it, it's very pleasing. The bottom's image is the Viltrox adapter, while the upper image is the Canon image without any adapter. In the middle, there's not really any difference at all. But when we start to move out in the edges, we're starting to see that the contrast here kind of gets a little bit lower in the newspaper compared to each other here. And another thing, if we zoom in a lot on the instax here, we're starting to see that there's a little bit more glow effect on the adapter. And also, if we go up to the camera over here, the Polaroid, we kind of start to see that there is a green glow coming around the edge of the adapter, and there's also a little bit less details in the area where we see the LED light on this Polaroid. Same goes if we go down in the edge and check out the text here. We kind of see that the contrast and the details are richer without the adapter. And the same goes for this side as well. Now we are pixel peeping a lot, so to say. But overall, I consider this quality that we get here to be good enough, more than enough. Perhaps there could be some issues if you putting your subject closer to the edges of the image. So keep that in mind. But either way, most of the time when you're shooting with vintage lenses, that's the way you're shooting anyway. So for the sole purpose of shooting with vintage lenses, this adapter is more than good enough. Let's have a look on the Samyang here and the Viltrox. This is also two different cameras. And we basically see the same thing here. It's very sharp and detailed in the middle. While when we come out to the edges, it starts to lose some details and sharpness, especially in this old camera here. We see more details when we don't have the adapter on. Let's revisit the Canon FD as well and compare it to the older one we did. First of all, then, this is a Canon FD 1.4 at an aperture at 2.8. And what we see here is that I struggle a little bit to find details in the middle of this picture. There's some details popping up here. So perhaps the field of view is not really where it should be. There's a sharp detail over here. But overall, this newspaper seems to lack some details, and I don't see so much details in the leather casing on the book as well. So let's compare this. The one in the top is made with the Canon FD 1.8. And let's zoom in here, and you clearly see that there is a huge difference in details between these two pictures. And if we just look on what we managed to get with the Zhonggi adapter and the Canon FD on an aperture at 2.8, we see that there is details. It's pretty sharp, and same thing goes when you come out to the edges. There's some green fringing starting to pop out. There's less details on the edges. In this case, I would say this is because of the lens. It's an older lens, and it lacks those details on the edges. But in the middle, it's more than enough. Okay, so the conclusion we came up with is that the Viltrox adapter is more than good enough, and the Zhonggi adapter is probably also good enough. Let's have a look on some real-world examples, and there's two examples here. There's some pictures where I used high quality glass or like newer lenses, especially the Canon EF-70 to 200 2.8, one of my favorite lenses. It has a lot of character, but I also used a lot of vintage lenses. I used this Jupiter 9, I used a Helios 44, and I used a Super Takumar. And let's start to have a look on this first picture here. It's made with a Jupiter 9, and what we can see is that it's sharp. Not in the face, but a little bit in the front, but it's sharp. And here's another one with the Jupiter 9, fully open at f.2. And what we can see is that it's very dreamy. There is some details, however, in the hair. But honestly, if your main purpose is to shoot with this, do you really need glass in this to be like perfect? Absolutely not, because the glass in this is not perfect. But however, even if the glass in this one has character, you kind of don't want this one to make everything worse. You still want this one to perform pretty good. But these glasses are never really good in the edges anyway, and neither is this one, but it's good in the middle, so it kind of equals each other out, and you still get the character that all these lenses has in the edges. For example, the swirly Helios 44. Here's another one at 2.8. There's a huge difference on the Jupiter 9 at f2 and 2.8, as we see here. It had plenty of details. Here's a close-up of my shoe, and we clearly see that it managed to keep the details in the middle. Here's some tree and wood, and we see that there's a lot of details and plenty of details for a lens that is of this age. Here's another one. This is shot with the Canon 70-200 at f2. Since we have a speed booster, we get lower aperture than we would normally get, so therefore I could shoot at an aperture of 2. And we see that it's sharp, there's details. Here's another one with a Helios 44. Shot in against the light, so it's hazy. See plenty of details in the hair from the Helios 44. We get a look on the swirls. We're going back to the Jupiter 9 and we see the softness of it. More Jupiter 9. And overall, the sharpness is plentiful. There's nothing to really complain about. Let's have some look at some of the newer lenses. What we're looking at here is the 70-200 again at an aperture of 2, which is similar to 2.8. It is 2.8 because it is a 2.8 lens. Speed boosters just give you more light. Therefore, this Viltrox adapter show a number of 2, but the depth of field is still the same. However, let's look on details on this. We see it's sharp enough. I can't complain about this. Same goes for this. All the others, there's absolutely nothing to complain about. There's plenty of details in almost every picture. It holds up. If we look at this picture, we see that the model is a little bit more on the edges of the side, yet there's still details in her face. So nothing to complain about. Same goes for this. Well, maybe not the best example. It's a little bit autofocus, but it's still a nice picture. Focuses in the back. Using the autofocus on this, it was a little bit challenging. But here's another one where we clearly see details in their face. Back with the Jupiter. Another one with the Jupiter 9. If we zoom in, there's details. It's soft details, but the details are there. And that's the whole thing with the vintage lenses. And that's my whole point. You don't need clinical sharpness. You just need an adapter that managed to provide a good enough result in the middle. What happens in the edges, it doesn't really matter that much, and especially not when you're going to focusing manually, you're going to miss, it's not going to be perfect anyway. So my conclusions is that I'm more than happy with the Viltrox adapter for my purpose. And my purpose, as mentioned, is to shoot with vintage lenses. However, if my purpose would be to using EF lenses on a Fujifilm camera, well, it's not really up for that task. The reason why you would want to do that is, for example, if you want to shoot with the 70-200 because of the character it has. In that case, you could take that payoff that it has. I also updated this one, so it has the latest firmware. So that's nothing that really affects the performance. However, I hope you find this video interesting. If you are interested in buying an adapter for your vintage lenses, and if you are considering to get a speed booster, well, I could gladly say that the Viltrox one is up for the game, and the Zhonggi one is probably up for the game as well. It was with the Canon FD, the new FD 1.8. However, it was a little bit soft with the 1.4, but if you find this content interesting, I would appreciate if you would subscribe to my channel. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. If you have questions, ask them below. Check out my other video that I did about vintage lenses and adapting them. That video will be here. And if you like this content, subscribe by clicking here. Thanks for watching, and I see you later.